with that guy, with that militant terrorist, whether he's involved with a cell and planning an attack or just carry out an attack or something like that, or he's someone who's becoming radicalized and may join a group. I'm trying to kind of get in his head. And so what I learned is they love to talk, especially a narcissist loves to talk. They love to hear themselves talk. They can't help themselves. That moves towards, I want to find out what he's up to, what he's planning, what he's procuring, who are the other people in his cell. So it's not really a crime at that point, but it's figuring out who he's connected to. And so for that, I would have very particular technique. If you want to go into it as part of this, we can, but that's a whole different animal. Good morning. My name is Brig Barker, and just give kind of a background on myself. So I was a military kid growing up all over the place, lived in Japan for a couple of years, and then ended up being out in Southern California, kind of growing up out there. Then went to college and ran out of money and went to the Army ROTC booth and ended up getting involved in their program, and they paid for my schooling, which was awesome. So then I went in the Army. I did 5 years there. I was based in Italy for 3 years, which was rough, but it was really fun. I had a great time. I learned to ski there in northern Italy and just traveled, continuously. So did that. And then I did a tour in northern Iraq, the end of my assignment there. So we were in northern Iraq doing kind of what they call movement to contact operation. And I kind of fell in love with the Middle East out of that for some reason. Then came back and then went in the FBI and did a full career in the FBI. And in kind of the, putting some of this together for me, I had these strange epiphanies. And one of them was 1998. I went over to Nairobi, Kenya for the U.S. Embassy bombings by Al-Qaeda and investigated that case with other people and fell in love with working terrorism. And so that became my trajectories. From there, I spent about 18 years rotating in and out of Africa and the Middle East. At the same time, I was going to Arabic schools. I fell in love with Arabic for some strange reason and became my life and became an interrogator. So finished up there and then just been doing private work ever since as a consultant. And, even as of yesterday, I was working on matters in Africa. So that's kind of my heart has always been helping in different areas there or investigating cases over there. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, son. So my dad, after he retired from the military, was working in the Middle East. So he was working in Saudi Arabia. He was working in Turkey. And he would come back and tell me these fascinating stories about driving in Mercedes in sand dunes where there's no roads. And so I think that sparked something in me. Then once I was over in my experience over there in Turkey and then northern Iraq, it was so foreign to me. I think that kind of caused me to be very intrigued by it and want to learn more. And so we worked closely with people, there, the Kurds in particular. And so, really got to know them and some of their tribal leaders. And I thought it was so fascinating. And while we were there, again, I think I'm drawn to things that are very foreign and unique. And so I think the Arabic language also became something that I saw in my future. Yeah, I think it was the culture, like the language, just the spark that I got from my dad, when I was growing up. It really started again from that experience in Nairobi, Kenya in 1998. Again, I was very fascinated by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and what these folks were doing. It was all very new to us. We were making it up as we went, right? But I think that really wanted me to learn more. And so after that, I started volunteering to go over. So I would go, for instance, when 9/11 happened, I went over to Cairo, Egypt, which is, strangely on the continent of Africa, but worked the 9/11 investigation there and just became more intrigued by it. So there we would meet with the Egyptian authorities, the police and the intel apparatus, and passing notes back and forth, trying to figure things out as far as who did what and what did they do and that kind of thing. So then I took that into other places in Africa. So if I was working in Kenya or Uganda or Tunisia, maybe in North Africa, same kind of thing. In 2006, I got a call to go to Sierra Leone in West Africa and open up the attaché office in the embassy there for the FBI, but also to lead the Blood Diamond investigation. So if you've seen the cool movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, he's much better looking than I am, but it's kind of there dealing with the reality of that. And so I would do that. And then I would also occasionally go and train different African nations on how we investigate, how we run informants. That's a big part of what I did in my career. And so I went to the FBI Academy, and we got 20 weeks of interviewing training and interrogation training. And for me, I was like, this is not me. I'm an introvert. I don't know how to talk to people, but I'm also a person that I've found that if there's something that I want to learn, I'll really kind of dive into it. So once I got out of the academy, went to field offices, I started finding people that were really good at interviewing, and I would kind of stalk them and watch them through the glass. And I'd tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, can I sit in the interview with you? Because I want to learn from you. And so I started plagiarizing their techniques and learning from what they did and and I got to a point, this is when I was working criminal investigations, organized crime, gangs, things like that. I started finding small successes in interviewing. And so I loved it. I started really I'd raise my hand, hey, I want to go interview this guy, whoever he is. And then when I switched over to terrorism as a completely different realm. And so I was interviewing, Al-Qaeda types, ISIS types, those kind of guys. And that's a totally different type of interview. So the bookmark on this is, as I was getting into this, I went and taught at the FBI Academy. I taught interrogation for 2 years full time. And I wanted to develop kind of a technique that I could teach new agents. So that's what I did. So I kind of developed a technique. And then after I left teaching at the academy, I went back into the field and continued to do it for years. And so I had my little niche, and I felt like it worked fairly well for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me. So you have to kind of, as kind of tailor to your audience, whoever you're interviewing, right? Whether it's on the street or sitting in an interrogation room or you're overseas on a ship interviewing somebody. Essentially, with gangs, organized crime, like bank robbers, you really need to spend a little bit of time assessing who they are. If you have information before you go in, that's great. Who this guy is, what his criminal history is, and things like that. But usually with that, it's finding what motivated him to rob the bank, join the gang. Maybe it's a sense of belonging, had no mentorship and wanted to have a group of guys that would mentor him and lead him. Bank robberies. When I worked out in Los Angeles, it was generally, they had to do it to join a gang. It was like a rite of passage, or they had a heroin addiction, or they had a gambling addiction. So it was usually with criminal cases, it's trying to figure out what the motive was. With terrorism, it's a completely different animal. It's ideological. So I use the ideology to kind of open the door with them. And then oftentimes with serious militants, like an Osama bin Laden type, they're very narcissistic. So you're interviewing a narcissist most of the time. So that moves towards, I want to find out what he's up to, what he's planning, what he's procuring, who are the other people in his cell. So it's not really a crime at that point, but it's figuring out who he's connected to. And so for that, I would have very particular technique. If you want to go into it as part of this, we can, but that's a whole different animal. But there you're focusing more on kind of intelligence gathering. So with that guy, with that militant terrorist, whether he's involved with a cell and planning an attack or just carry out an attack or something like that, or he's someone who's becoming radicalized and may join a group, I'm trying to kind of get in his head. And so what I learned is they love to talk, especially a narcissist loves to talk. They love to hear themselves talk. They can't help themselves. And so what I would do is I'd build rapport with them as much as I could. And then I had about 10, I'll call them indicator questions that were very much would compel a black or white answer. So if I said, what do you think about the situation in Palestine? And then let them answer. In interrogation, we shoot ourselves in the foot when we go in and bail them out. You can't do that with a good interrogation, especially with a terrorist. So you ask them a very controversial question like that. And generally, if you have rapport, they're going to give you a truthful answer, exactly kind of what's in their heart. And so I've had about 10 of those questions that I would thread into the interview. And that would give me a sense of how radical they were. And radicalization is a whole nother realm we can discuss if we needed to. But for me, I was also trying to figure out where they were on that spectrum. Had they just joined kind of a radical group? Were they thinking about it, or were they getting ready to be triggered into carrying out action? And so after an interview like that, I usually felt pretty good. This is about after 10 years of doing it, of where they were, in that spectrum. So build rapport, ask them questions, get their responses, and then I would literally leave and I'd say, okay, here's where I think they are on this line. So yeah, that was that piece that tended to work for me. And this, Simon, I'll just caveat it with, like, when I've taught radicalization courses, sometimes I've taught it for 2 weeks straight, 8 hours a day. It's such a deep ocean, as you can imagine. But I'll hit some kind of wave tops with it. And I learned all this as I was kind of plunging into this and working these cases and interrogating folks. Radicalization is very unique. I'll just give you an example. I always like to use kind of the prison example, right? I've interviewed a lot of people in prison. So when you go into prison, you've got to find a group. You've got to connect with somebody for protection a lot of times, or just to have that kind of belonging while you're in there, better have the numbers type thing. And so oftentimes what they would do is they would convert to Islam, which is, 85% would convert to Sunni Islam. And then within Sunni Islam, there's 4 schools of jurisprudence, what they call fiqh in Arabic, F-I-Q-H. So there's 4 schools of fiqh, and usually you're going to, kind of become part of that. It's almost like in Protestant Christianity, like Baptist, Methodist, that kind of thing. So it's kind of this box, and you kind of step into it based on who your imam is in the prison. And that is not where we find radical folks. And I'll say, based on my experience of probably almost 30 years doing this, the majority of Muslims never become radical, never become jihadists. There is a small percentage, and that's what I'm talking about right here. So if we're talking about that small percentage, they may go into one of these kind of 4 schools of jurisprudence, but the radical side, the Al-Qaeda side, is outside of that. And it's in a kind of a movement called the Salafi jihadist movement. And so that's where the radicalization happens. And again, I can go into some depth on this, but basically that's where you find yourself. If you start becoming radicalized, you're with 2 or 3 people, mentors, and they start walking you down this road. And they're showing you videos on, hey, these are injustices against our people or Palestine or whatever it may be. But it's kind of this brainwashing mechanism. And so they start walking down this road of radicalization. What puts them on that road is very unpredictable. It can be a myriad of things. Their cousin got killed in Palestine by, Israeli police. That could have put them on the road. For instance, there's a lot of different reasons. The road itself is very predictable, but then the trigger to action, which is what we're always concerned about, is the other unpredictable factor. What causes someone to say, I'm going to pick up a rifle today and go shoot at some folks at a military base or whatever it might be. These are humans. I mean, I look at myself, right? Growing up in a home where basically there's no parents around ever. I was one of these latchkey kids with no boundaries, and so easily I could have gone a different route, but for some reason I didn't, so I always, even when I was sitting in the room with the most radical person, I saw them as a human. I really treated them with respect. Now, of course, I've got a motive here too, to find out if there's some nefarious intentions or activities going on, but they are human, and something caused them to go down this road. Yesterday, our company's working on a project in Africa right now, in Democratic Republic of Congo, which is mess right now. And there's 2 groups there. There's an ISIS group, and then there's another group called M23, which is like a rebel group. And they're just bringing carnage to the whole country. And, each one of those, look at it from afar, you say, this is horrible. And it is. What's going on is just absolutely horrible. But each one of those people that are involved in carrying out these bad acts, they're humans, and something caused them to join that group, whether it's the M23 rebel group or the ISIS group or whatever it is. But they are humans. And so figuring out kind of what the impetus was for them getting involved in the group. A lot of people say, I don't really care. I always cared because I wanted to understand them, generally with the intention of, I was always trying to recruit them to be informants to go back into the cell. That was always my ultimate goal. What I would do, I can tell you, whether it's gangs or organized crime or terrorism, I'd have them kind of charted out who was part of the group. And I was trying to figure out who's vulnerable to recruitment. So if someone was kind of on the outs, or sometimes it would be just go right for the jugular, go for the main leader. If we saw some things going on where there was kind of a fissure where we could kind of enter and try to recruit that person, or maybe as the financier, right? The person who's moving the money, wife just left him, whatever makes him vulnerable. And then I would go in and just have a conversation with a purpose, as we call it, and just kind of see how open they are. I would use ruses to get in front of them. And then once I'm in front of them, I'm very friendly with them. I'm very respectful of them, but I have this motive, if I can, not only to elicit information, but if I can recruit them over to our side, that's the ultimate goal. Because if we can do that, then we've got eyes and ears, inside. And there's a lot of media coverage and things on the FBI, and I've been retired for 9 years now. There's a lot of political talk, and there is some problems in the FBI that needs to be rooted out. But I think there was always kind of this view or perspective that it's the Federal Bureau of Intimidation. It's we're just going to go in and bowl everybody over. And there are scenarios that require that. When I worked fugitives, I remember a guy that killed 3 separate people. He was a serial killer. Yeah, we're going in because we got to get that guy off the streets, But generally, using soft skills is a very important part of the FBI. So it's this interviewing piece that's, I would call, soft skill. It's not intimidating. It's just going in and trying to get some information. Almost it looks like a befriending process, because if you go in and kind of poke someone in the chest and, hey, you need to tell me what's going on, like the movies or, different shows, you see Law and Order or whatever, I never found that worked. No one wants to be pushed around, bullied, things like that. But if you go in and say this person is a human and they're going through some hard times right now and they got caught up in some bad things, I would go in, my approach a lot of times is, listen, I think, you've made some mistakes. You've gotten involved with the wrong group, and I'm guessing you're conflicted, and let that kind of seep in. I use a lot of silence interrogations. If you fill the room with silence, it compels people to talk, right? So I would just give them I toss a few things on the table like that. And I think you want to do the right thing. That kind of thing, just let that fill the air. And a lot of times that resonates with people, and they realize I probably shouldn't go buy those explosives for this group that wants to go do bad things at a mall. So I think the misconception is the FBI is just going in and bowling everybody over and we're going to do whatever we want. But the reality is a lot of things happen behind the scenes that are more soft skills with still the same goal of protecting the public. So I've talked to so many people through the years. The FBI in general has been pretty competitive. Somehow they made a mistake and let me in at some point, right? But, I always say you really want a background that stands out, that's very different, right? So I always tell people a few things. Number one, take a very unique language. I took Spanish in high school. I pretty much failed out of Spanish in high school, by the way. But Arabic made sense to me. I don't know why, but take a very unique language, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, Farsi, something like that. That if you're sitting in an interview with 3 agents, which is what you have to do, panel interview, you want them to say, oh, this person did a few things different. Also, I say, try to get some travel under your belt, go to some unique places, not just the college Europe semester, which is great, but try to go to Mongolia, go to, places in Africa, go to Thailand, go to places that not everybody else has been. And then I think add some other skills and hobbies in there. I'm a big fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I kind of do that on a weekly basis, take some martial arts that make you stand out a little bit, but also give you some kind of defensive tactics skills. And then if you can take, like a shooting course or do some shooting, some training in that, again, that makes you stand out. And I tell females that a lot too, because we need so many females in the FBI, and they're amazing agents. And by the way, they're amazing undercover assignments. They are way better than the men in a lot of ways, but undercover females in the FBI, what a cool job it is. And so I really encourage, when I talk to high schools and college folks, I point to the females and say, the FBI really needs you because you could do some really cool stuff. I teach a overseas travel awareness course, and, it's men and women in there, and I've taught it, 80 times or something. And there's a defensive tactics portion of it. We don't teach cool, Bruce Lee Kung Fu stuff. It's like what to do if someone grabs your purse and you're in kind of a dangerous country. I teach a lot on situational awareness, and I teach a lot on heuristics as far as looking at what are the anomalies in your environment. And by the science, women have a wider peripheral vision, actually much wider than men. Their situational, my experience, situational awareness is much better. A lot of guys are paranoid in dangerous situations where females have more of a relaxed awareness, and they're able to keep clarity when they're taking actions. And the other thing I found is they're just badasses in defensive tactics. I've taught so many courses where I've got females in skirts and high heels, and they are kicking the bag, and it's scary because I'm like, wow, I would not want to be the assailant. So what you're saying is absolutely true. There's this probably heightened awareness because you may be shorter or, might not be as intimidating as, some men. I was watching that show, Jack Reacher, last night for the first time. He's like 6'5", 250 pounds. No one's going to mess with that guy. But if you're a female and you're 5'4", yeah, you're definitely more vulnerable, because if I'm an assailant, I can probably get her into a trunk. I can't get that guy into a trunk. They're very similar in that you work as a team. Military, I've been in Iraq a couple of times. When I was in the military, we slept in the dirt together. We ate behind a bush together, like tactical feeding, that kind of thing. You do everything together. You run together. You travel on planes together. There's this real camaraderie, but you're just all forced together. The FBI is very similar, not to as much of an extent, but you sit a squad area. So you and I and three other people sit together and we all work cases together. So if we're working espionage cases, like we're all talking, we're all working together. And, Simon says, hey, I need surveillance help today. I need a couple of folks to help me. Hey, we're all in, or like I ran a couple terrorism task forces and I call you and I say, hey, it's midnight on a Saturday night, but I need you to go knock on a door with a couple other people on your squad to figure out if this information is accurate. And you do. So you go through, the greatest bonds are built in spending, experiences together, especially in difficult situations. So you have that in the FBI as well. You're always working together. You're testifying in each other's cases. You're going through very difficult times together. And so you have this bond that grows. I would like to mention AI just because my company, Blue Atlas Group, now about half of our work is on the AI side. And I think so much is moving that way, right? Pretty much everything we do touches AI. I just want to mention a couple things. So AI was, it's been around since the 40s, right? But in the last few years, it's kind of been taken on by other people, and everyone's using ChatGPT and to build your website and write your reports or whatever. But the bearer of bad news here is that this year is a year to really watch out on the AI side, especially if it's a company with a lot of data sets and it's sensitive information, that kind of thing, because we're going to see this agentic AI. So they have these proactive agents inside AI now. They're going to start opening up backdoors, stealing data and these kind of things. So I just want to mention, like, the whole AI world is super cool. This is the year when we're going to start seeing some bad actors getting involved, and we're going to see AI tarnished in a major way. And so I just want to toss that out there. And I base that on reading hundreds of articles on this, and listening to true experts. So our company, we have a private AI server. So your data stays within it. There's no one else's data is in there. So we're doing some things different, but I just wanted to toss that out there. And that's the way of the future for sure. Keeping a keen eye on your data, especially because everyone's worried about the proprietary data or sensitive data. It's be careful what AI platform you're using. So if it's ChatGPT, everybody in the world is dumping data in there and it's very tainted. So something you write on the internet is different from what I write culturally, country-wise, and all this. So the best thing to do is just make sure you vetted the AI company that you're using for your data, and then keep an eye on things because, again, it's biased generally, and there's a lot of issues with what we call data poisoning. So keeping one eye open at night on your data, I guess, is really the best thing that you can do. I mean, it's what they call technology optimism. Like everyone's jumping on the wave, riding the wave. This is so cool. But yeah, we're not kind of monitoring the bias and the poisoning. And again, folks that are trying to kind of, access data. So now I was brought into as president of the Blue Atlas Group, and we're doing half of our work, like I said, is the private restricted AI piece. So we provide that to companies that want to over protect their data. And then the other half is kind of freeform. So like I said, we're doing work in Africa right now in some of these more denied areas, helping with logistics and information collection and things like that. And then we have conglomeration of something. So we have a whole apparatus down in Latin America that's doing some super cool things, protecting against fentanyl supply chains. It's coming into the US. And I mean, everything is pretty much Team America project. So we're trying to protect our country from nefarious things that could be happening. So yeah, it's a whole lot of different things. I have worked counterterrorism, but I've also worked espionage a little bit. And so I think that I can't say there's just one, but I'm always worried about the jihadist threat, like we saw in New Orleans, which most people have forgotten about beginning of the year, where that guy, drove his vehicle as a weapon, as they call it, into a crowd, shot him up with a rifle and all that. The jihadist threat will continue to be a horrible threat that we have to kind of monitor. Espionage, everyone spies on everyone. Every country spies on each other. So that's going to continue to be an issue. And then I think, and this is another project we're working on, is the cartel influence into the U.S. So very dangerous groups. Their networks are very dangerous. They're very sophisticated. And so that's just going to bring more violence into the country. So unfortunately, I have to say three things: terrorism, espionage, and then just this cartel violence that's kind of spread. So sorry, I couldn't just say one. I appreciate, being able to hang out with you and just kind of kick the can around on different topics. It's always fun. I love to do that. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that with you.